To the U.S. now, and just hours ago, President Biden departed San Francisco, concluding a week of meetings with world leaders there for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. It included talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, their first since the two met a year ago in Bali on the sidelines of the G20. Earlier, my colleague Katrina Perry spoke about those meetings, as well as the week in the Israel-Gaza war with former acting CIA Director Michael Morell. He now focuses on national security issues on his weekly podcast, Intelligence Matters, The Relaunch.
Michael Morell, thanks indeed for joining us on BBC News. Now, we heard this week both President Biden and President Xi talking about not letting international competition spill into conflict. How have the various meetings and interactions this week gone? Have they done anything to tip or stabilise the relationship?
So I think the important outcome of the summit was the fact that we're going to continue to talk, and most importantly, we're going to start talking again in military channels. That's important because it allows, in a difficult situation, in a time-breaking situation, in a crisis situation, to dampen tension. So you want military-to-military communications. So that's the most important thing to me that came out of this week. What I would say is that both sides for some time now have wanted to dampen the rhetoric. Both sides have wanted to reduce tension. And there's been a number of meetings now going back over 9 months or so between cabinet officials on both sides and coming together now in a meeting between President Biden and President Xi. And all of that's positive. But what hasn't happened, Katrina, is there's been no change in the underlying structure of the relationship which created those tensions in the first place. So there's been no change in Chinese theft of intellectual property, for example. There's been no change in the Chinese crushing dissidents both at home and increasingly abroad, including in the West, including in the United States. There's been no change in Chinese behavior in the South China Sea. So the rhetoric is been dampened, but it will return with certainty.
What are trust levels like? You know, is mutual spying still part of the relationship?
Of course, right? And there always will be, right? Spying goes way back in history, and that will continue. But there are norms, right? There are norms about what's acceptable and what's not in spying, right? And for example, I just talked about the Chinese theft of intellectual property, right? That's outside the norms, right? The United States has never stolen intellectual property from our competitors and given them to our companies to give them a competitive advantage, right? That's what China does every day. That's outside the norms. So while spying will continue, right, there's some types of spying that are unacceptable and should be unacceptable.
So what does that do for the trust between the two nations then?
So I think more important than intelligence operations is the trust issue with regard to Taiwan, right? And where we think the Chinese want to go and how the Chinese think about how the U.S. would respond to any sort of military operation, Chinese military operation against Taiwan. That's where the real trust issues come home. It's what everybody has been thinking about for a number of years now, and what everybody will continue to think about going forward.
So if we look at how the administration then views that China relationship and the various threats and concerns that it has, if we look at that alongside the support that the US is giving to Ukraine, the unwavering support that it's giving to Israel at the moment, can the US fight on all of those fronts at the same time?
Absolutely, right. The United States is the largest economy in the world, the largest military in the world. It remains the most powerful nation in the world. It is absolutely possible for us to do more than one thing at a time. It is absolutely possible for us to continue to provide the support that President Zelensky needs in Ukraine, to provide the support that the Israelis need in Gaza, and continue to compete at a very high level against the Chinese.
Now, just Speaking about the Israel-Gaza conflict for the moment, this week the White House said that it could confirm that it was what it called a command and control node, a Hamas command and control node underneath the Al-Shifa hospital, backing up the Israeli intelligence. Just how much sharing of intelligence is there between Israel and the US at the moment?
It's a very close relationship between U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence, not just during times of crisis, but during normal times. I spent a lot of time during my career talking to my Israeli counterparts. So it's a very close relationship, and I would imagine it's even closer today. For example, trying to find out where the hostages are, right? 240 hostages. It takes intelligence to figure out exactly where they are. It's an intelligence-intensive process, and I'm sure it's something that the Israelis are working very hard on. I believe it's something that we're working very hard on because 10 of those 240 hostages are American citizens. And I wouldn't be surprised if we are working very closely with the Israelis on trying to figure out where those hostages are.
What's your assessment of the Israeli intelligence so far, insofar as you're aware of it?
Well, obviously, right, there was a huge intelligence failure here in terms of not understanding what Hamas's intentions were with regard to October 7th and what their capabilities were with regard to October 7th. And we will, right, over time, find out why that was the case. There's a lot of speculation now about why they failed to the extent that they did. But I think it will take some time. It will take a commission in Israel before we know. One of the things that strikes me, Katrina, is that when we learned, we at CIA learned that Saddam did not have the weapons of mass destruction that we judged him to have, that we believed that he had. It took us another, year, 6 months to a year to figure out why we were wrong. And so I think, it's going to take the end of combat. It is going to take a commission in Israel before we really learn why they failed to the degree that they did in understanding what Hamas was going to do on October the 7th.
Michael Morell, former acting director of the CIA, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome, Katrina. Good to be with you.